You're visiting the Mom Next Door and our stories of faith. I'm glad you dropped by for a visit. Please stay a while and hear what the Lord has done in the lives of moms just like you and me. Okay, if you've been listening for very long, you know that the way I usually start off my show is by introducing the way that I've met my guest. And today I actually want to throw it out to Celeste and see if you have a recollection of how you met me and see if it lines up with how I remember meeting you.
Well, I remember that we were new to town. My husband and I had met in California and lived in Eastern Oregon for a number of years and then moved back to my hometown where I had grown up. And we were trying out some new churches, and we happened to end up at Pam's church. We finished whatever the sermon was or whatever, and we were on our way out. And I had a bunch of my kids with me. And I think I had 8 at the time. And Pam comes up behind me and goes, "Are those all yours?" And then I turned around, kind of like, okay. And she said, "Oh no, I'm just teasing. I have a whole bunch of them too," and introduced herself. And so that's how we met. And when I came home, I found out we had so many mutual friends. And so that was just a fun connection. And I don't know that we stopped talking after that.
That is exactly the story I was thinking. And it's not always, you don't always remember how you met somebody, but I distinctly remember the day that I met you because I remember watching you at church and watching you with all your kidlets and counting them all. And that night, I think I only had 2 of mine with me, but at the time, I believe I might have had 9, 8 or 9 myself. I can't remember. And so I remember, I just know that when we go places with our large family, people always say something. And so, yeah,
Some snarky comment.
Yes, I was being a little ornery that night, but you took it in jest, and we kind of have had fun with that ever since. So
That's true.
Anyway, yep. So that's how I remember meeting you as well. So would you like to introduce your family otherwise?
Sure. So I have 10 children currently. My oldest daughter is married, just signed papers to buy their first house this weekend, or this past weekend. And I have one that's just finishing up at college. She's at Boise State University. And then I have one at Bible College this year. I have a 17-year-old son. And then I have almost 16-year-old. And then a 14, 12, 10, 5, almost 5. Oh my goodness. And a 2-year-old.
Yes. So, okay, so we're just going to jump right in because I know, Celeste, you and I could talk for probably 3 or 4 hours. And
Or days.
We've spent a lot of time talking through the years, and I know we could just go on and on. So we are going to try to isolate it to this one incident in your life, this one story that really has been a challenge. It's been a huge challenge, but also an area that God's used to grow your faith. And so do you want to just kind of take us back to the beginning of like how you were feeling at the time and what happened?
Yeah. So I had my youngest son was born in 2018. He was born in April, and I had just not felt great. I thought I was, getting older. It was a harder pregnancy, a little bit longer birth than I was used to. I was very lethargic. I generally have pretty good energy. I stay fairly healthy. And so it was, I felt like I couldn't do anything to help myself feel better. And I so after he was born, I just felt like there was something I needed to follow up with. I needed to be seen, or something like that. And I'm not typically a huge, I don't run to the doctor for everything. I've got 10 kids. I'm busy. I don't have time for that. And so I had gone for my 6-week checkup, and they had said that it seemed like my uterus was kind of on one side. It seemed more enlarged than usual. And I had never had that happen before with 10 kids, but they kind of said, well, that can happen. You've had a lot of kids. Maybe it's just not shrinking like it had. And totally unbeknownst to all of us, there was actually a tumor that was growing there, and was actually going to be growing pretty rapidly, which I had no idea. And so I kind of just went on with my life, tried to recover from baby like you do, and get into life as a mom. I was very busy homeschooling, and just doing all kinds of things that moms do, running to sports events, and I'm pretty active in most of those kinds of things. And so around, I would say, I don't know, I think it was around November that I started to notice my belly just wasn't shrinking like it typically did. It seemed swollen, and it wasn't super concerning. I was just a little discouraged, like, man, this mom belly, it's just right there. And we did our Christmas pictures, and when I got them back, I could visibly see that my abdomen didn't look normal. And I have had some kids that were pretty close together, but I knew that I wasn't pregnant. It didn't seem pregnancy related. And I thought, okay, I'm going to really, take the bull by the horns. I'm going to get in shape. I'm going to do something about this. And so I always try to include my kids in things that I do. And I had decided to kind of start this like floor routine kind of thing. I'm going to do some stretches and some, maybe some kind of stuff to get my abs working or something like that. And so I had my kids like down on the floor with me, and I just remember I felt this. I felt the tumor, like I could tell when I laid on my back, and I had the kids kind of climbing on my legs or whatever, and I felt it, and I went, "Oh, that's not normal. Something's there. Something shouldn't be there." And my dad had had diverticulitis. I thought perhaps it was something like that. Maybe I'm having some kind of gastrointestinal problems. I need to go see a specialist or something like that. And so that was really kind of the beginning of it. And so I started talking with my husband, and my adult children were going to be coming home and visiting for Christmas. And so I finally sat the three oldest girls down, and I said, I don't know what's going on, but something's not normal. And I think I need to go into the doctor. And so we decided to do it while they were home, because they could keep kids and kind of know what was going on. So I ended up going in, and they immediately did a CT scan, and said that my levels didn't look normal, and told me that they thought it was possibly some kind of cancer, and I would need to follow up with a specialist. I mean, you just don't expect to hear that, when you're healthy and you don't feel old. And
And you
my
just had
my
a
good
baby
friend,
and
right,
you yeah, you
he was barely the 7 or 8 months old. I mean, he wasn't very old because he had been born in April, and this was December then. And so I had kind of put it off for a month. And the guy just said, well, until you follow up with a cancer doctor, you really don't know what your time frame is going to look like. It could be, 6 months, it could be a lot longer. Well, I had just had a good friend of mine who was only 35, who had had a diagnosis of breast cancer. It was a rare form of breast cancer, and she had lived 6 months and died. And so it was very fresh in my mind that she had left her husband with her babies, and I knew that that was a reality. And what was interesting is that for probably a decade I had wrestled with the verse, 1 Peter 3:15, which says that be ready always to give an answer to any man that asks you the reason for the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. And I had memorized that verse as a kid. For whatever reason, that was a verse that had stood out to me. And I wrestled with God over what is the hope that is in me? How do I how do I tell people what hope is? And I really struggled with that verse. And I felt like God began to show me what the hope that was in me was. I didn't know. And I don't know why that particular thing really stood out to me, but hope became the word that I really clung to. And so my aunt had actually asked me at some point during this journey what a word was that had stood out to me, and I just immediately said hope, because that was my word. And so when I would go out places, if I saw a little sign that said hope, I would buy it, um, and she bought me a little necklace that said hope. And so that just became something I really clung to. And then the verse in Romans 15:13, may the God of hope fill you with all joy and peace as you trust in him, so that you may overflow with hope by the power of the Holy Spirit. And that became kind of my new verse, that I wanted to overflow with hope. And so, of course, I'm a very private person. I don't generally like to draw a lot of attention to myself. I was kind of raised that way. I'm pretty matter of fact. If you know me, I like the bottom line. And so this was really hard to share. It was really hard to reach out. It was hard to, not be the mom that does everything, and to let people do things for you, and to let go. So anyway, so those verses just really started to help me be able to have kind of foundation to share about it. I just shared how I felt like this was something that God needed me to journey on in order to really grasp what that hope was. And I didn't know why I had to, face a death sentence to really start to see that. But that's how it started to feel. And so that kind of started the ball rolling pretty quickly. I needed to go to a lot of doctor's appointments. They immediately told me that I needed to have surgery to have these tumors removed, and then they were going to be able to biopsy them and find out what kind of tumors they were, whether they really were cancerous or not. And so I went in for my first surgery a few weeks later. And so I had to immediately get my breastfed baby figured out, how he was going to get on some bottles. I was determined to keep trying to breastfeed. And so I was pumping all the way up until my surgery, and tried to get that back afterward as soon as I could, because you can't give a baby milk if there's a lot of contaminants in your body. And so I chose not to do really any of the heavy kinds of drugs that they give you for recovery. I went off of painkillers almost immediately. I just said, my baby's health's more important than mine right now, because I wanted to make it to at least a year with him on some kind of breast milk. So started that journey, which was interesting. And so after that first surgery, went in for the second surgery, because they did find that it was some kind of cancer, and they knew that they hadn't successfully removed everything the first time. And so we ended up having to find a specialist in another state that was going to be able to do that surgery, since the doctors here in Oregon, there wasn't any specialists anywhere nearby. And so I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but anyway, so we really had to plan as a family how that was going to work, for us to be gone, for our kids to be taken care of, for our community to come around us and make sure things were going to keep running, because it was going to be a much longer recovery the second time. It was a pretty big incision. And so they went all the way from my sternum down to my pubic bone, straight down, and then it was going to be very long. So it was like a 14-hour surgery. And after going through all of that, and having, my daughters coming home from college, my newly married daughter coming over to take kids, we had grandparents kind of trying to come in and out, people bringing the kids food every night. And it was just so humbling. And you really don't know going into something like that if you're going to make a recovery or not. Because, they say, well, this is your best chance, but that's pretty much what you have. And so it was a lot of just dying to self, And I've always been a big fan of Elizabeth Elliot, and I began to resonate with parts of her story more so than I ever had before. Not because obviously my husband didn't die, or a tragic death or anything like that, but just her perspective on suffering. She has a book called what is it? It's A Path to Suffering, and it's a short book, but the whole thing is about how we see in nature just that dying to something always produces something else, and that something has to die in order for something good to come of it. And I began to just cling to those truths. I'm also a huge Keith Green fan. Absolutely love Keith Green, and his music just ministered to me. My husband put it on like a little thumb drive and was able to just play those songs. And he died relatively young and left his wife with his children. And I just felt like I could really see where I wanted to be close to the Lord, like I never had before. I wanted to see his face, and I had always kind of feared, what would I really want to be there and face judgment, because to me, I think, even as having been, raised in a Christian home, and knowing the truths of scripture my whole life, that really wanting to face, you're selfish, you're stuck on, silly things, or you have desires that aren't from the Lord, and letting go of those things, that's really not something we think about in our day-to-day life. We typically just kind of try to get done our to-do list or whatever. So it was a lot of just sleepless nights, of just a lot of those thoughts.
So what kind of cancer was it? I can't remember the exact. I know it was very rare.
Yeah, so it's appendix cancer. It's actually, it has this long term, it's like pseudomoxa something something, which means that it hides itself as something else. So the first part, pseudo, it generally never reveals itself until it's spread, which is part of why it's generally not diagnosed until it is in the fourth stages, and can already have, infected different, I don't think that's the right word, but affected organs that it cannot be removed successfully. And so that's always kind of the concern going in, is what organs were affected. And so they knew going into the surgery that I was going to lose something. We just didn't know what or how extensive. I mean, it's like 2 pages of these documents that you get from the doctor's office going, these are all the possible things in your abdomen that could be affected. It doesn't generally spread outside the abdomen, which I've heard is kind of one of the, can be a good thing, although there's different forms of it, and so certain ones are just more aggressive than others. Mine was actually considered the less aggressive version. So even though it had spread, it really just would depend on what organs were affected. So you kind of sign them off on, go ahead and take whatever you need to, because you want to save my life. And so it's kind of a blank check. And the surgery, like I said, is pretty extensive and pretty exhausting. And then you can't eat at all because it's digestive. It affects a lot of your digestive system. So I spent several days just totally out of it.
So I don't remember the exact timing. It seems like you guys were just really praying that you would be home by
4th of July.
4th of July. That was it. So that particular time at the hospital, you guys were out of state. You had lots of your little ones at home. I mean, just being away, you're not used to being away from your babies,
No.
and until they go off to college. And so I know that was like you expected a really long time, and God just came through on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we knew that we had a few months to prepare for that, which was a blessing in some ways, because yeah, a lot of stuff happened in those couple months. Because it was abdominal, they fear that cutting through everything too close together can cause other complications. And so since I had had surgery in January, they did want to wait a few months to basically reopen you. And so they kind of give you a time to go through a recovery period. So we did have a lot of time in that sense, not a lot, but some time to kind of think through systems and organization, and trying to get who's going to do what so that the house will function and run when we're not here, and who's going to go where. And letting go of, your nursing baby and letting somebody else try to, in fact, I remember the morning that we were heading out to fly to Texas, just nursing my baby, and really because of, again, the not knowing what the end result would be. They tell you that you'll likely have a full hysterectomy, which is a lot more extensive than than people think. It's more than just like a typical hysterectomy. When they do a full hysterectomy, it's pretty extensive. There's just in fact, a lot of people lose a lot more than just their uterus and their, ovaries. And so that was a very real possibility. Like, this is my last baby, and I have to just wean him, spur of the moment, on my way to the airport. So I did. I cried, feeding him. And if you've nursed babies, that's just kind of an emotional thing anyway, when they decide they don't need you anymore. And then to do it so abruptly was hard. I don't know if that fully answers what you're asking, but we did have some time to kind of put those things in place and know, okay, this is the one that's going to do this chore and keep this running. And we have several animals and, a lot of those kind of things. So
I remember they had expected you to not get home till like July 9th or something. And you were like, oh, I'm praying. I'm trusting God that I'll be home for the holiday. And
yeah.
that was what I remember, is that it was like things just went as well as they could be. And you made it home for 4th of July, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, it was pretty miraculous, really, that that I started to recover, because like I was saying afterward, it's a pretty rigorous recovery. You literally can't even eat ice. They don't want anything in your digestive system because it's been through a lot. They go in and they scrape everything, and they do a heated chemotherapy, which is probably controversial. I don't know, isn't everything, but when they heat everything up, it's kind of kills, it's essentially supposed to try to kill any cancer cells, but it also kills a lot of other things that are in there. So after they've scraped everything, they put this heated therapy in there and leave it for like an hour, and you're being rocked so that it sloshes through everything and tries to cover everything. So you're essentially kind of sewed up for a temporary time and then taken back apart. And then they try to clean all the toxins out, and my lung collapsed afterward because of all the tubes and things like that. And so then I was getting x-rays every, several times a day after, it's just for someone who's been relatively healthy, never had a surgery before. I had never, I was very against radiation and all these kinds of things, and I'm just like a guinea pig, I felt like, to all of these procedures. So yeah, the recovery was definitely going to be longer than they had expected, and I wasn't bouncing back.
And so this is all so recent. Like, I mean, it's barely 2021 right now. And this whole journey for you started in 2018, you said.
Right.
And so after you go through a whole process like this, there are rechecks and checkups, and every periodically, we'll say. And so
Right.
tell me about that. You went for a checkup. You went for your
Yeah.
periodic check-in.
So they tell you that that generally, if this type of cancer is going to come back, if they missed something, that it's probably going to come back in the first 2 years. And so we kind of had this like time frame in the back of our minds, like, we'll see what happens. And so I should just share, before we actually came home from the hospital, kind of my turning point was, I guess, one night I was just feeling especially discouraged, and I don't really know how to phrase all this, but essentially the night before I went in for the surgery, I had already lost one ovary, and I just had it on my heart that if there was any way that I could keep my other ovary to keep my hormones regulating, that no matter how long I had, I just really would like to not be pushed into a pretend menopause too soon, and let my body be able to do that naturally. Besides, all the organs are connected and all of this. So I had actually sent out to specific people on my prayer chain to pray for that one thing. That was like my one miracle. I was just praying that the Lord would preserve my one ovary. And so the doctor had really questioned that, because ovaries are they just have a lot to them. There's a lot of spots that little tiny cells can hide. And he said, if you keep that, there's a 50-50 chance that this will come back in that spot, and it generally will. And I had said, that I was comfortable with him keeping it if it looked healthy when he went in there, if everything looked the way it was supposed to. I was comfortable with him keeping that and taking this 50-50 chance. And he said, well, that's a big chance that you're risking a lot. And I said, I just knew that if God wanted that he would allow that to look healthy like it was supposed to, and, see what happens. So I didn't know, because of the recovery being pretty extensive, I didn't know for the first 3 days that I had actually survived that organ, that was one that hadn't been taken out. And I should have probably felt extremely, blessed that the Lord was allowing that. But you get pretty beat down after, being exhausted with that. So it really kind of settled in. Like, I was very thankful, but at the same time I was having all these other emotions. I wanted to be home with my kids, and I was, not feeling great. So that was exciting in that sense, but not maybe impressed on me as much as possible. So the evening, though, because I was kind of waking up from some of the grogginess and comprehending more things, I had my family picture, and I was just really missing everybody. And I started crying. And this little nurse came in, who'd probably been nursing for, I don't know, 40 years or something. She looked ready to retire. She was so sweet. And she had this real thick accent. She was Asian, and had come in and just said, you know, oh, sweetie, why you cry? And I had just told her, this is my family. This is what I'm missing. And I just really want to get home to them. And so she just had tried to be somewhat encouraging to me, and had actually come in and bent down on the ground at my feet and prayed for me. And just, it was just such a blessing. I needed that. And so I kind of pulled myself back together and had my evening. And I literally woke up the next morning. They wake you up like 10 times a night, poking you and doing this or that. But I woke up the next morning, and I just felt like, I can do this. I can recover. I can get strong again. I want to get home. And she came in the next morning, and she just went, oh, you're doing so much better. They're going to discharge you early. And it was like a total turning point. And I just felt like her prayer had meant so much to me. And she said, I went home and I pray for you. And she said, I never usually do that. I don't usually just feel so connected to this other person. And she said, but I prayed so hard I cried. I thought, well, she's my prayer warrior, that I needed that extra excitement, to get me to that next stage. And so I was just thrilled. They ended up letting me go, not an entire week early, but much earlier than I had anticipated, which was really encouraging. So yeah, so I went home and started this kind of long process toward healing, and putting your efforts back into just starting life again as best you can, and making the adjustments that you need to. And went in for my CT scan in the next December, because you do it every 6 months. You have to go in for another CT scan. And so I had gone in for that. And the equipment at the hospital in Silverton was not the same quality as what it had been over there at this cancer center. And so they kind of just told me, it's inconclusive. We can't really tell it. Your ovary doesn't look normal. So they had preserved that ovary, but it didn't appear normal. And I thought, oh, geez, it is going to come back, So I kind of had this looming feeling of what am I going to do? How am I going to recover from another surgery? What if it's come back somewhere else? What if it's this or that? And so I kind of just had that hanging over me a little bit. But and people said, "How can you even keep going without knowing the answers?" I'm like, I don't know. You just kind of do. You just keep going, right? And so I was waiting for this second CT scan that we were going to be flying to Texas to get it on a better machine that could see a little bit more clearly. And so, summertime came, we booked our tickets. Well, then COVID hits. Oh my goodness. And so that was like a whole other element. So we get to Texas, and I knew that my husband wasn't going to be allowed to go with me to any of my appointments because with COVID, they were having really high restrictions at the hospital. So no one was allowed to attend with you, which is really discouraging when you feel like, well, what if I get really bad news? What do I do? I don't have any support person there. If, I'm just there by myself in this waiting room. And so that was kind of nerve wracking. So a few weeks before I left, I was, just walking like a normal person to my car, and I stepped off the curb and I broke my foot. And so I went into the hospital for that, and it ended up being a blessing because when we got to Texas, my husband wheeled me in a wheelchair. And I said, is there any way that he can get approval to come with me to my appointments so that he can push my wheelchair because I can't walk. I broke my foot. And they actually gave him full approval for the entire time that we were going to be there, which was like 3 days of appointments. So that ended up kind of being a blessing in disguise. I went in for the first day of testing and blood work and whatnot. And I wasn't going to see my specialist until the third day because they want to get all your tests done. And so Scott was able to be there with me and take me into these various appointments. So I believe it was the second day was the day then I was supposed to go in and have my CT scan, and I'd already run a lot of my blood work. And they said, well, we can't approve your CT scan because your hormone levels don't look normal. Is there any reason that your hormones would be off? And I was like, no, I don't think so. I'm not on any medications or anything like that. And so they kind of got a little frazzled and tried to figure out what was going on. And then finally the doctor just said, or I guess he was like a technician, whoever was doing the lab work. He said, well, we need to get special approval from your doctor. We can't get a hold of him because he's in the OR today. So if they're in the operating room, they can't, receive messages or anything. So he said, we're reaching out to the physician's assistant who's trying to reach out to some other doctors who might be able to tell us whether or not we should go through with the CT scan. And I'm just sitting there going, I have not eaten since last night at 5 o'clock when I had dinner. I'm really getting grumpy. What are you doing? Why can we not just go in? I just want to take my contrast and get in there. Anyway, so it ended up that they finally just said, we think that you could possibly be pregnant, and we don't want to risk the fetus if this is a pregnancy. And I went, there's no way I can be pregnant. Like, they told me that, this like surgery and all of this chemotherapy kill all of your eggs. There's no way that any of them even survived. And if they did, it's going to be deformed and it's probably not going to survive anyway. So I was feeling pretty like, this guy's nutso. But they ended up letting me leave, go get lunch, and said, we'll have your doctor follow up with you. So the physician's assistant called me, we were waiting for our lunch, so within the hour, and said, we want you to come back and get an ultrasound. So we did, and because of Scott being able to be there, I just kind of said, just push me into the room. And so as he's pushing me in, the lady said, the nurse that was going to be doing the ultrasound said, do you need his assistance? And I said, oh yeah. Which was such a blessing, because can you even imagine getting news like that when you're in there just, thinking like the worst, like they're going to tell me that the cancer's back, I'm going to have to get another surgery or something like that. And then you get this totally unexpected news. So yeah, so he just pushed me right into them. Yeah, yeah, I need him here. So he was able to be there, but in a cancer center, they're not typically doing baby ultrasound. So they didn't show us anything. They wouldn't show us the screen. They just kind of wanted to know what it was. And so then the lady wrapped up and said, "Okay, we're done." And I'm like, "Oh, so what's the deal? Like, tell me some news." And she's like, "Oh, no, we can't share anything until you've talked to your doctor," which was the next day. And I'm thinking, there's no way I'm going to sleep at all tonight if I don't at least know what's going on. So I had to put in a request to see the radiologist who could approve me to see this ultrasound and find out some information. And he was willing to come in, which my doctor the next day told me was very rare. Radiologists don't typically walk away from their desk, and they certainly don't come in and confer with patients. So he did. He came in and he talked with me, and he said, "Well, would you like to see the ultrasound?" And I said, "Yeah." And so he showed us where there was a 6 week, 4 day baby where they could see the heartbeat pretty strong. And he said, "It's got a strong heartbeat. It looks like a viable pregnancy." There was some hemorrhaging on the edge of the yolk sac, I guess, or something like that, which could be a sign of an early miscarriage. But just the fact that I had gotten pregnant was pretty miraculous. And so then we went in and met with the doctor the next day, and he was actually jovial, just for the fact that my recovery was happening. He said, "I don't think that your body would survive a pregnant, or would allow a pregnancy if you weren't recovering pretty well." And I'm like, "But is this baby going to have 3 arms, like 6 legs, 3 eyes? Like, is there something wrong? Because they told me the eggs aren't supposed to even survive." And he's like, "No, it looks like it's probably a healthy pregnancy, but you'll definitely want to follow up." So after meeting with the doctor, I'm calling my gynecologic oncologist here in the Portland area and saying, "Okay, I need to be seen immediately." So I made my appointment to see her right away. And she confirmed that it looked like everything was healthy, and she was excited for us, which was just totally unexpected. And so really my entire vision of going into these appointments and thinking God just wanted me to die to myself, which he does. He wants us to do that every day, but this focus on death was totally transferred to life, and going, I'm going to prepare for a new life, which I'm due in 2 weeks now. So so here we are. It's just kind of come full circle.
I love it. And as soon as when you texted me from Texas and said, "Oh my goodness, you're not even going to believe this." Actually, I think I had just started the podcast like with a couple weeks before that. And I
Right.
was like, "Ooh, someday we're going to tell Celeste's story, and to God be the glory for what he has done, because he heals, he restores, he makes sense of things when the doctors can't. And he uh, what do you call, he befuddles, or he just confounds, isn't that the word? He confounds those who just have all this wisdom, and God did it. And so
Yeah.
I'm excited for the next couple weeks as you wait for this little baby, and I can't wait to hear of the arrival. And so anybody listening right now can be praying for you and your delivery and this new little baby, and we can just rejoice in God for what he's done in you and your story. So thank you so much. Now, I just always like to end in prayer. Lord Jesus, I just thank you for the opportunities you give in our life to grow in you, and to just learn these things. They're so unexpected, but we know you have a purpose, you have a reason. Lord, I just pray that as Celeste speaks to doctors, that your name would be lifted up, and that people would see that you had a hand in this. Lord, I pray for this delivery and for this baby. There's such a purpose. I just wonder at what this baby will become. Lord, I just thank you for the women listening. And I pray that wherever they are, if they're discouraged, if they've had news that's difficult, that they would see that if they just stay faithful and trusting you, you will bring about the information they need, the people they need to surround them and that no matter what we go through, it is to grow us in our walk with you, and that we can turn around and give you the glory. In Jesus' name, amen.
I hope that you've been encouraged or challenged in your faith today, and that something we discussed prompts you to grow deeper in your walk with the Lord. If it has, make sure you tell a friend so they can grow along with you. And if you or a friend would like to be a guest and share about God's faithfulness in your life, please email me at podcast@tendingfields.net. Because when we tell of God's faithfulness, we never run out of stories.
Whatever is true, whatever is noble, think on these things, think